Over the last 50 years, Australia's tourism industry has experienced a drastic increase in the number of its international tourists, growing from 1 million every year in the 1970s to 4.9 million international tourists in the year 2000. As a relatively young nation of the world, Australia has had to face and overcome the challenges of promoting itself as a desirable destination in a modern society. The objective of presenting Australia as a feasible tourist location to the entire world has primarily fallen on the shoulders of graphic designers such as Gert Selheim. Through the exploration of Selheim's work, one will find that it is possible to evaluate each aspect of Australia that has been held in high regard throughout history, and why they were selected to capture the Australian identity. It is important to examine these areas and unveil how the idea of what a modern Australia looks like has changed over time. Through extensive research, one can compare the techniques used by Selheim and the Australian National Travel Association with the techniques used by the current Australian tourism campaigns and uncover the similarities and differences that these design initiatives have. Gert Selheim was a German-Australian architect and graphic designer throughout the 1930s, 40s and 50s. Selheim was born in Viljandi, Estonia on the 31st of December 1901. Selheim spent his early years growing up in Estonia before joining the military and serving in the Russian Civil War from 1918 to 1920. Later, Selheim studied architecture in Berlin, Munich, Vienna, Graz and Paris, after which he moved out to Australia in 1926 to pursue a career in architecture. After moving to Australia, Selheim struggled to find work as an architect. So, in 1930, he moved to Melbourne to begin work as a graphic designer in the Australian tourism industry. Not long after, Selheim became one of the leading graphic designers for the Australian National Travel Association. Selheim quickly gained a name for himself, designing travel posters for the ANTA that promoted a modern identity for Australia. Selheim had identified Australia as a nation which was evolving in exciting and modern ways. The designs which he produced for the ANTA had a distinct, cutting-edge style about them. This style that became so famous around the world appeared to be somewhat governed by a combination of the Cubist and Art Deco movements that had gained an incredibly strong foothold across the globe during this time. Selheim used a variety of photographic, drawing, colouring and lettering techniques to produce travel posters that presented the feel of a particular location rather than a direct depiction of it. This notion of expressing the feel of a place rather than a depiction of it contrasts heavily with that of Percy Trompf, a graphic designer for the ANTA at the same time as Selheim. Trompf's style was also heavily influenced by the Art Deco style. However, his designs were far more directed towards illustration than Selheim's. Many of Trompf's travel posters used his Art Deco style to create a series of incredibly detailed illustrations that focused heavily on the beautiful landscapes of Australia, drawing upon the use of intricate details to create an image. Trompf's work tended to represent a physical depiction of the land, whereas Selheim's work aimed at creating a specific mood that would sell a modern Australian identity to the world. Selheim used an Art Deco approach combined with Cubism to create designs that were minimalistic, linear and geometric. In this way, he presented Australia as a modernist society that was aiming to progress towards the future. Throughout the 1930s, the ANTA had a very specific aim, that being promoting Australia as a modern, progressive nation to an international audience. The United States of America, England, France, and Germany were all leading this modernist movement, and the ANTA desperately wanted to give Australia a similar identity that would attract as many tourists as possible. The ANTA used the designs produced by Selheim as a means to project this concept of a modern Australia. To achieve this, Selheim started to incorporate identities that had previously been ignored into his portrayal of Australia. He started to use the culture of Indigenous Australians as a focus for many of his poster designs. Being one of the first designers to do so, Selheim's work soon began to expand to multiple companies associated with the ANTA. This expansion started to fulfill the initial aims of the ANTA. Over time, the ANTA developed into being Tourism Australia. which is Australia's leading tourism company today. The aim of Tourism Australia is similar to that of the ANTA, in the sense that its primary goal is to draw as many international tourists to Australia as possible. However, the method and techniques used have slowly changed. Looking at one of Tourism Australia's current campaigns, the Australian Philosophy, one can see that they have used graphic design techniques such as photography to combine the techniques of Selheim and Tromp. The Philosophy campaign focuses on presenting a feeling alongside a depiction of a location to catch the attention of its viewers. Tourism Australia utilises both of these techniques to portray what is considered to be the laid-back, easygoing nature of Australians. The new aim for Tourism Australia is to deliver a small taste of what it is like to visit Australia, rather than presenting the full experience. The hope is that people will be left wanting more. Through these techniques, one can observe the transition between advertising to a modern and postmodern world. Both similarities and differences can be identified with the ANTA and Tourism Australia. Their similarities lie within the overall aim of the company, which, for both the ANTA and Tourism Australia, is to capture a particular culture and attitude and present it to the world. Each company has identified the image that they view as the most desirable label for Australia, and they implement different styles and techniques to achieve their goals. The use of graphic design as their primary mode of communication is something else that they share in common. Contrasting to these similarities, one can also identify a key difference between the ANTA and Tourism Australia. Each of these campaigns is advertising a nation to a different audience. The ANTA need to advertise a modern Australian identity, one that looked towards the future and showed off a perfect tourist destination. The ANTA focused on looking forward, not backwards. On the other hand, Tourism Australia is advertising to a postmodern audience, and as a result, they desire to depict a genuine, authentic Australian identity that looks back in history and embraces its pre-existing cultures. Despite their differences, each of these campaigns were designed to promote an image of Australia to the world, and each campaign is suitable for its time. Following on from this is the issue of Australian stereotypes. Both Selheim and Tourism Australia had to overcome the challenge of existing stereotypes that surrounded Australia, defining how tourists viewed it. The Australia that Selheim and the ANTA were attempting to promote was one that had very little global recognition. Selheim had to create designs that would stand out and draw attention to the nation that so many had previously looked over. As a result, Selheim's method was to create an image that captured Australia as the ideal place to have a holiday. His designs focused not on the traditional Australian culture, but on attempting to bring European culture to Australian shores. Tourism Australia, however, have focused more on embracing the Australian stereotypes of being laid back and relaxed. They have looked at using the authenticity of Australian culture to attract the much wanted attention of the international travel industry. Through the exploration of Gert Selheim's designs for the ANTA and the contemporary postmodern designs produced for Tourism Australia, it can be observed that they have a very similar goal, in which a wide variety of modernist and postmodernist techniques and principles have been applied so as to achieve these goals. Essentially, each of these campaigns have had to navigate certain cultural stereotypes and discover the best way to promote an Australian identity according to the relevant times. The goal of promoting Australia all around the world, particularly in North America and Europe, has remained the same despite the methods having to shift to suit the changing times.